All right, folks, today we're diving into a topic that touches all of us in some way, family. No matter where you go in the world, every society has some version of it. It's a social institution that plays a huge role in shaping who we are, how we relate to others, and how our communities function. So let's start with the big picture. When we talk about family as a social institution, we're talking about a system that organizes certain key aspects of life. Families bring people together into cooperative groups that take care of one another, especially when it comes to raising children and supporting each other through life's ups and downs. The bonds that connect people in a family are called kinship. These are social ties based on shared ancestry, marriage, or adoption. So whether it's the people you're born to, the ones you marry into, or those brought in through adoption, those relationships all fall under the umbrella of kinship. And while we often think of marriage in romantic terms, from a sociological perspective, it's more than just love and commitment. Marriage is a legal relationship that usually includes things like economic cooperation, sexual intimacy, and childbearing. There's also generally an expectation that it's going to be a lasting arrangement. Now, when we look at how families are structured, things start to get really interesting, and they vary depending on the kind of society we're talking about. In pre-industrial societies, for example, people typically had a broader view of family. You didn't just live with your parents and siblings. You were likely surrounded by aunts, uncles, cousins, grandparents, and maybe even more distant relatives. This kind of setup is what we call the extended family. It made a lot of sense in those contexts, where survival often depended on shared labor, pooled resources, and strong family networks. But with industrialization came big changes. As people started moving for work and seeking new opportunities, social mobility and geographic migration broke up those large family networks. That's when we see the rise of the nuclear family, also known as the conjugal family. This is the smaller, more self-contained unit made up of one or two parents and their children. It's the kind of family structure many of us are most familiar with today, especially in more urban and industrialized societies. Now let's take a closer look at marriage, which plays a big role in how families come together. Now, marriage can look very different depending on cultural expectations and legal systems, but there are some broad patterns that show up around the world. Let's start with who people are expected or allowed to marry. In some cultures, there's a strong push toward endogamy. That means marrying within the same social group, like someone who shares your religion, ethnicity, or social class. The idea here is to maintain cultural traditions and social boundaries. Other cultures lean toward exogamy, which is the practice of marrying outside your social group. This can serve as a way to build alliances, form new social ties, or promote diversity and integration across different communities. Now let's talk about the number of people involved in a marriage, which brings us to monogamy versus polygamy. Monogamy is the most common form in many parts of the world, especially in high-income countries like Canada. It means having just one partner. And in these places, it's not just a cultural preference, it's often backed by law. Polygamy, on the other hand, involves more than two people in a marriage. There are two main forms here. Polygyny is where one man has multiple wives. Polyandry is the opposite. One woman has multiple husbands. Polygamy tends to be more common in certain lower income countries, where it can be linked to cultural traditions or economic structures. That said, it's not entirely absent in countries like Canada. There's actually a polygamist colony in British Columbia, which shows how cultural practices can sometimes persist even when they challenge national laws. It's a great example of how marriage norms aren't always consistent, even within the same country. One of the first big questions couples face after getting married is pretty practical. Where are we going to live? And as simple as that sounds, the answer can vary a lot depending on the society, and it usually tells us something deeper about cultural values and social structures. In some societies, the answer is patrilocality. This means the couple moves in with or near the husband's family. It's a pattern we often see in more traditional or patriarchal cultures, where the husband's side of the family plays a central role in the couple's life. In these setups, There's often an expectation that the man will continue to support and be closely tied to his birth family, especially in terms of property, labour, and family duties. On the flip side, we have matrilocality. That's when the couple moves in with or near the wife's family. While it's less common globally, it does occur in cultures where women's families hold more social or economic influence. In these societies, inheritance, support networks, and authority might be more centered around the female side of the family. Then there's a third option, which is more typical of industrial societies like Canada, neolocality. This is where the couple sets up a completely new household, independent of both families. It reflects values like independence, privacy, and mobility, things that are often essential in urban life where people move around for work or education and may not live near extended family. Next, let's turn to another important part of family life, how societies define who belongs to the family across generations. This process is called descent, and it helps answer a fundamental question: who counts as your kin over time? In many pre-industrial societies, descent is patrilineal, meaning family ties are traced through the father's side. In this system, things like the family name, property, and social identity pass down the male line. Patrilineal descent often aligns with patriarchal structures, where men hold primary authority both in the household and in the broader community. But that's not the only way to do it. Some cultures follow matrilineal descent, tracing kinship through the mother's side. While this is less common, it's found in certain indigenous and traditional societies. In these cases, family identity, inheritance, and responsibilities flow through women, placing their roles more centrally in how family is organized. Then there's bilateral descent, which is more common in industrialized societies like Canada. This approach recognizes both the mother's and the father's sides equally when it comes to defining family connections. It reflects a more egalitarian view of kinship, where inheritance, caregiving, and emotional bonds are acknowledged across both parental lines. Now, let's look at how authority operates within families, because who holds power and how decisions get made plays a big role in shaping family life. And just like with descent, authority patterns vary across time and culture. For much of history, the dominant model has been patriarchy. In patriarchal families, men are the main authority figures, controlling finances, making household decisions, and often having significant influence over the lives of their wives and children. This structure has deep roots in many cultures and still influences how families function today, even in more subtle ways. You've probably heard the term matriarchy as well, but it's important to clarify that while some cultures give women significant influence, there's no solid historical evidence of any fully matriarchal society where women dominated in the same way men have in patriarchies. So while women may hold power in certain areas like lineage or property, it's not a complete reversal of patriarchal authority. That said, things are changing. In many industrial societies today, including Canada, we're seeing a shift toward more egalitarian family structures. Here, decision-making and authority are more likely to be shared between partners. It's not perfect equality, but it does reflect evolving ideas about gender roles and what a fair partnership looks like in modern family life. All right, let's turn our attention now to some of the key theories about the family. So far, we've covered what families look like, their structures, roles, and authority patterns, but now we're digging into the why. Why is the family so important to society? And how do sociologists explain its function and impact? As you might expect, there's more than one answer to that. Sociological theories give us different ways to analyse family life. Some take a macro-level perspective, focusing on how the family fits into and supports the larger social system. Others take a micro-level approach, looking more closely at the daily interactions and personal dynamics that shape family relationships. Let's start with the macro side of things. One major framework here is the structural functional perspective. This approach views the family as a vital institution that helps keep society stable. Think of it like a system where each part plays a role in maintaining the whole. According to this perspective, families serve a few key functions. First, there's socialization. Families are the primary setting where children first learn the norms, values, and behaviors of their society. It's through family life that kids are introduced to the cultural expectations that help them become functioning members of their community. Second, families help regulate sexual behavior. This is about more than just rules. It's about maintaining social order. For example, most societies enforce an incest taboo, which prohibits sexual or marital relationships between certain relatives. This helps draw clear boundaries and avoid serious conflicts within families. Third, families handle social placement. That means they provide individuals with a social identity from birth. Things like class, ethnicity, and religion are often inherited through the family, shaping a person's position and opportunities in society. And finally, families offer material and emotional support. They meet basic physical needs like food and shelter, but they also provide emotional care, things like affection, belonging, and psychological stability. While the structural functional perspective does a solid job of explaining why families are seen as essential to society, it's not without its blind spots. There are some important critiques to keep in mind. First, it tends to overlook family diversity. Not every family fits the traditional mold. Think about single-parent households, blended families, same-sex parents, or chosen families made up of close friends. This theory often assumes a one-size-fits-all structure, which doesn't reflect the range of family forms that exist today. Second, it can gloss over the negative aspects of family life. The structural functional view assumes families always support the well-being of individuals and society. But that's not always the case. It doesn't really address serious issues like abuse, neglect, or ongoing conflict within families, all of which can have long-lasting social and emotional impacts. So while this theory helps us understand some of the key roles families play, it also paints a somewhat idealized picture, one that leaves out a lot of the complexity and challenges that families can face. We'll continue our look at the family by shifting to social conflict and feminist theories. These perspectives challenge us to think beyond the idea of family as just a source of love and support. Instead, they focus on how families can actually help maintain inequality in society. From a social conflict point of view, families are not isolated from power structures, they're deeply tied to them. One key way this plays out is through the transmission of property and wealth. Families are central to passing down resources from one generation to the next, which reinforces class inequality. If you're born into a wealthy family, you're more likely to inherit land, businesses, or financial assets. But if your family has no wealth to pass on, it's a lot harder to move up the social ladder, and that keeps the gap between social classes in place. Patriarchy is another major concern. Historically, family systems have been structured so that men hold more power than women, making the decisions, controlling finances, and setting expectations. Even today, many family dynamics still reflect this imbalance. Women are often expected to take on caregiving and household duties, while men are expected to be the primary earners. These roles reinforce broader gender norms that limit opportunities and maintain inequality. On top of that, families can also contribute to racial and ethnic inequality. Practices like endogamy, marrying within one's own racial or ethnic group, can preserve cultural traditions, but they can also reinforce divisions between groups and limit opportunities for social integration. Feminist theories take these ideas further by specifically focusing on how families are a site where gender inequality is produced and reproduced. One issue is the unequal division of labor in households. Even in dual income families, women often do more of the unpaid domestic work, which tends to be undervalued despite being essential. This connects to another concern: economic dependence. Traditional family roles can leave women financially reliant on male partners, which reinforces unequal power dynamics. And families often socialize children into specific gender roles from a young age, shaping their behavior, interests, and expectations in ways that align with broader systems of inequality. That said, these perspectives aren't without their criticisms. One common critique is that they emphasize inequality so much that they overlook the positive functions families can serve, like emotional support, stability, and belonging. They also tend to overgeneralize, assuming all families operate the same way, when in fact many families challenge or reject traditional norms around gender, class, and race. And while these theories often connect family inequality to capitalism, many of the same issues, like patriarchy or inheritance, also exist in non-capitalist societies, suggesting these dynamics are more deeply rooted than just economics. At the other end of the spectrum, we have micro-level approaches, which shift the focus from broad social systems to the individual experience of family life. Instead of viewing the family as just one part of society's machinery, this perspective sees it as a space where people build meaning, develop relationships, and handle the everyday realities of living together. It's a way of understanding family life from the inside out, through the lens of individual choices, interactions, and emotions. Micro-level theories encourage us to ask, how do people make sense of their roles as partners, parents, or siblings? How do they negotiate responsibilities, express care, or handle conflict in ways that are meaningful to them? Two key approaches here are symbolic interaction theory and social exchange theory, both of which help us understand how family life is constructed through daily interactions. The symbolic interaction perspective emphasizes that family life is shaped through shared experiences and emotional connections. Through things like shared meals, holiday traditions, bedtime routines, or even everyday conversations and conflicts, people actively create and sustain family bonds. Something as simple as a family dinner might symbolize connection and routine, while a parent helping with homework builds a sense of support and trust. These moments are more than just tasks. They carry meaning and reinforce relationships. This perspective highlights how family isn't just an institutional structure, it's something people actively create, moment by moment, through their interactions. Next, we have the social exchange perspective, which looks at family relationships as forms of negotiation, where individuals weigh costs and benefits. Think of courtship or marriage as a kind of exchange. People bring certain things into the relationship, like emotional support, financial stability, or shared goals, and seek a return that feels worthwhile. If both partners feel they're benefiting, the relationship is likely to be satisfying and stable. But if the balance tips too far in one direction, that can create tension or even lead to a breakup. This theory helps explain why people enter into, stay in, or sometimes leave relationships based on how they perceive the balance of give and take. While these micro-level perspectives offer valuable insights into the emotional and relational dimensions of family life, they also have their limitations. One major critique is that they often overlook the larger structural and cultural forces that shape those individual experiences. For example, a family living with financial stress may make choices or have interactions that are heavily shaped by economic pressure, but micro-level theories might miss that context. Similarly, overemphasizing uniqueness can be a problem. While each family is different, many share patterns shaped by broader forces like class, gender roles, or cultural traditions. Ignoring these patterns can make it harder to see how inequality or systemic pressures show up in family life. All right, let's keep going with our exploration of family life, this time by looking at how it unfolds across different stages. From finding a partner to adjusting to the realities of married life, the family is a fixed structure. It's a dynamic process, constantly shaped by social norms, personal expectations, and everyday experiences. Today, we're going to focus on two important early stages: courtship and romantic love, and the transition into married life. Let's start with how relationships begin. The process of finding a partner has changed significantly over time and varies across cultures. In many pre-industrial societies, arranged marriages were the norm. These arrangements weren't about love or chemistry. They were practical decisions focused on strengthening family ties, securing economic stability, or preserving social status. Individual preferences didn't carry much weight. Family priorities came first. But with industrialization, especially in Western societies, romantic love started to take center stage. As ideas about personal freedom and emotional fulfillment gained popularity, people began choosing partners based more on attraction and shared feelings than on family strategy. This shift reflects broader changes in social values, where marriage became less of an economic or political alliance and more of a personal and emotional journey. Still, even in cultures that emphasize love and choice, patterns of homogamy or marrying someone similar to oneself remain strong. In Canadian society, for instance, people tend to choose partners with similar educational backgrounds, religious beliefs, ethnic identities, and even age. This isn't necessarily a conscious decision. It's often a result of the social environments where people meet, like schools, workplaces, or community organizations. So while love is the dominant narrative, social structures still influence who ends up together. Now let's move on to what comes after the honeymoon phase, settling into married life. Marriage is often idealized in our culture, with lots of expectations about deep romance, constant happiness, and complete trust. But when couples move from the excitement of courtship to the routines of daily life, many find themselves scaling down those expectations. That doesn't mean giving up. It just means adapting to reality, where maintaining a relationship takes work, compromise, and communication. Marriage also comes with its own set of challenges. One common area is sexuality. Partners may have different needs, preferences, or expectations, which can require honest dialogue and flexibility. Then there's the challenge of maintaining happiness in the midst of everyday responsibilities, paying bills, managing jobs, raising kids, and dealing with stress. These things don't necessarily harm a marriage, but they do complicate the picture of perfect harmony we often see in media. And finally, there's the issue of infidelity. While cultural norms in Canada strongly emphasize monogamy, not all couples remain faithful. Infidelity introduces a whole new layer of complexity to relationships, and it often challenges the romantic ideal many people start out with. It's a reminder that love and commitment are influenced by both cultural expectations and the realities of human behavior. Now let's turn our attention to two key stages in the life of a family: raising children and navigating family dynamics in later life. These stages reflect not just individual choices, but also broader social trends and cultural shifts that shape how families function today. Starting with child rearing, this is a central part of family life for many people, but the way we approach raising children has changed significantly, especially since industrialization. In high-income countries like Canada, there's been a clear trend towards smaller families. A few major factors drive this change. First, raising kids is expensive. Housing, education, childcare, it all adds up. Many families are choosing to have fewer children to manage their finances and invest more in each child's future. Second, better access to birth control has given people more control over family planning. And third, cultural values have shifted. There's less pressure to have large families and more emphasis on personal goals, career development, and lifestyle preferences. It's not that people care less about family, it's that there are more options now for how to define it. Another big shift is that more people are delaying parenthood or choosing not to have children at all. In Canada, this is becoming increasingly common. For some, it's about prioritizing education or career goals before starting a family. For others, it's about the freedom to choose a different kind of life path. Parenthood is no longer seen as a given or a requirement for adulthood. It's one of many possible choices. As families move into the later stages of life, the dynamics shift again. For couples who've been together for many years, marriage in later life often emphasizes companionship, mutual respect, and shared experiences. It's less about navigating new roles and more about maintaining the bond that's been built over decades. There's often a sense of stability and deep understanding that comes from facing life's ups and downs together. But for many in midlife, particularly those from the baby boomer generation, there's a unique challenge known as the sandwich generation. These are people who are caught in the middle, raising children under 18 while also caring for aging parents. On one side, they're helping with homework, managing kids' schedules and supporting their development. On the other, they're coordinating doctors' visits, assisting with daily tasks, and providing emotional support for their elderly parents. It's a demanding role that can be both physically and emotionally draining. At the same time, it highlights something important: the interconnectedness of family life across generations. Families aren't static. They evolve, and each stage brings new responsibilities, new meanings, and new challenges. Whether raising young children or caring for aging parents, the way we experience family continues to be shaped by both personal choices and the larger social context we live in. All right, now we must discuss the complex ways that inequality, whether based on social class, ethnicity, race, or gender, shapes marriage and family life in Canada. Families don't exist in a vacuum. They're deeply influenced by the broader societal forces around them, and those forces can have a major impact on everything from who people marry to how they raise their children. Let's start with social class, which plays a huge role in shaping both expectations and experiences in family life. One key area is marriage expectations. For example, in higher income families, people might prioritize things like education, career potential, or shared life goals when choosing a partner. In families with fewer economic resources, practical concerns like financial stability or emotional support may be more important. These priorities aren't random. They reflect the realities of what each family needs to survive and thrive. Social class also deeply affects children's futures. A family's financial security can determine whether a child has access to quality education, extracurricular activities, healthcare, or even a safe neighborhood to grow up in. These factors shape a child's chances of social mobility, either breaking out of poverty or maintaining class privilege. In short, class doesn't just shape how families live now, it influences the entire trajectory of their lives going forward. Next, let's look at how gender shapes family life. A helpful way to understand this is through the idea that every marriage can actually be experienced in two different ways: a woman's marriage and a man's marriage. This idea comes from sociologist Jessie Bernard, who argued that women and men often live very different realities within the same relationship. Women are more likely to carry the burden of caregiving, emotional labor, and household responsibilities, even when they also work outside the home. Men, on the other hand, tend to receive more emotional and practical support from marriage, often without taking on the same level of domestic work. Even in modern Canadian families that value equality, traditional gender roles haven't disappeared. Many couples strive for balance, but societal norms still influence how tasks are divided, how parenting is shared, and who's expected to sacrifice time or career goals for the family. So while the idea of an equal partnership is gaining ground, gender inequality often continues in more subtle forms. What all of this shows us is that family life, something that often feels so personal and private, is deeply connected to structural inequalities in society. Class, race, ethnicity, and gender don't just shape opportunities outside the home, they follow us into our relationships, influence how we raise children, and even affect how satisfied we feel in our personal lives. So when we study families, we're also studying how power, privilege, and inequality play out in everyday life. Let's now turn to the role of ethnicity and race in shaping family life in Canada. These factors significantly influence how families are formed, how they function, and the kinds of challenges and strengths they experience. And as always, it's important to start with this reminder: families in racialized communities are not a monolith. There's enormous diversity in structure, values, and experiences, and we need to avoid falling into stereotypes or overgeneralizations. One key area where we see the impact of race and ethnicity is in economic inequality. Families from visible minority communities, including many immigrants and Indigenous families, often experience disproportionately high rates of poverty. In fact, the incidence of low income among visible minority families is significantly above the national average. Immigrants who are part of the Black and other racialized communities are especially at risk. These economic disparities are shaped by a mix of systemic discrimination, barriers to employment, and unequal access to resources like education and housing. This financial strain can influence family structures. For example, single-parent households, especially those led by women, are more common in some of these communities. In many cases, families are managing limited resources while also facing the stress of navigating unfamiliar systems, especially for recent immigrants. But again, it's important to recognize the diversity here. Not all racialized families are economically disadvantaged, and not all follow the same patterns of household structure or experience. At the same time, many racialized families demonstrate strong cultural resilience. Cultural traditions, extended kin networks, and tightly connected communities often provide significant emotional and social support. These resources help families cope with economic stress, maintain identity, and create a sense of belonging, even when facing systemic challenges. This resilience is a key strength that often goes unrecognized in public discourse. Another important trend is the growth of multi-ethnic and interracial marriages in Canada. While still a minority of all couples, these unions have become increasingly common over time. In 1991, only about 2.6% of couples were in interracial relationships. By 2011, that number had grown to 4.6%. These relationships reflect not only demographic shifts and increased diversity in urban centres, but also changing attitudes toward race, identity, and family. They also challenge traditional boundaries and offer new forms of cultural blending and understanding. To complete our discussion of how race and ethnicity shape family life in Canada, we need to give particular attention to Indigenous families. Their experiences stand apart because of the deep and lasting impacts of colonialism, which continue to shape family life today in profound ways. One major issue is the overrepresentation of Indigenous children in foster care. Despite making up a much smaller percentage of the population, Indigenous children account for over half, 52.2%, of all children in care. This is not simply due to individual family circumstances. It's often the result of systemic discrimination by institutions like hospitals, social services, and law enforcement, which continue to apply biased standards to Indigenous families. These patterns reflect a long history of state intervention into Indigenous family life. Indigenous children are also less likely to live with both parents and more likely to be in non-traditional family arrangements. While some of this reflects broader social and economic pressures, it's also tied to a painful legacy of policies specifically aimed at breaking up Indigenous families. The residential school system, for example, forcibly removed children from their homes, separating them from their parents, communities, languages, and cultures. These schools caused intergenerational trauma and left lasting damage, not just individuals, but to the structure and health of entire communities. Beginning in the 1960s, we saw a dramatic rise in the number of Indigenous children placed in state care, a pattern sometimes referred to as the 60s scoop. These practices continued the colonial legacy under a new name, removing children from their families and placing them with non-Indigenous foster or adoptive homes, often without consent. The effects have been devastating, severing ties to family, culture, and community. In response to these harms, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, TRC, made a number of recommendations aimed specifically at addressing issues related to families and children. These include improving child welfare practices, preserving Indigenous languages and cultures, and supporting the restoration of Indigenous family and community bonds. The TRC emphasised that true reconciliation requires acknowledging and repairing the damage done to Indigenous families and ensuring that Indigenous communities have the power and resources to care for their children in culturally meaningful ways. Let's continue our discussion of family life by looking at one of the most significant transitions a family can go through, divorce. While marriage is often framed as a lifelong commitment, the reality is that many marriages don't last. Understanding the causes, trends, and impacts of divorce helps us see how this major life change continues to shape families across Canada. Over the past century, Canada has seen a dramatic rise in the divorce rate. Today, about 41% of marriages are expected to end in divorce. So what's behind this shift? Why has divorce become so much more common? There are a number of contributing factors. One major one is the rise of individualism. In today's culture, there's a strong emphasis on personal happiness and fulfillment. When a relationship no longer supports that, people are more likely to consider ending it. Another factor is the fading of romantic love. While love may bring people together, keeping that emotional connection strong over time can be challenging. especially when the excitement of new romance wears off. Gender roles have also shifted. In the past, many women stayed in unhappy marriages because they were financially dependent on their husbands. But with more women in the workforce today, there's greater economic independence, which opens the door to leaving relationships that aren't working. On top of that, modern marriages are under a lot of stress, from demanding jobs and busy schedules to the pressure of managing household responsibilities and personal goals. Parenting too, while rewarding, can add emotional, physical, and financial strain, especially when couples already feel overwhelmed. Social norms have also changed. Divorce no longer carries the same stigma it once did. It's increasingly seen as a reasonable, even healthy option for couples who are no longer happy together. And finally, legal reforms have made it much easier to get a divorce in Canada. Removing legal barriers has made the process more accessible to people who may have stayed in unhappy marriages in the past simply because it was too difficult to leave. Of course, not all couples face the same likelihood of divorce. Young couples, those who marry early, before gaining financial stability or emotional maturity, are more at risk. Couples dealing with financial stress also tend to face more strain. Interestingly, divorce is also more common among dual career couples. Even with financial stability, the demands of balancing two careers can put a lot of pressure on a relationship. Divorce doesn't just affect couples, it also has a major impact on children. Custody arrangements have changed a lot over time. In the past, custody typically went to the mother, with fathers providing financial support but having limited involvement. Today, there's a growing move towards shared custody, where both parents play an active role in raising the children and making decisions together. This approach aims to support the child's well-being by maintaining strong relationships with both parents, even after the marriage ends. Now, let's continue looking at transitions in family life by turning to remarriage and blended families, another increasingly common aspect of modern family dynamics. Across Canada, nearly half of all marriages now involve at least one partner who has been previously married. As a result, more and more families today are what we call blended families. A blended family forms when people with children from previous relationships come together in a new marriage. These families can vary widely in structure, but they often share some similar challenges. For instance, they may need to navigate complex relationships between step-parents and stepchildren, manage co-parenting responsibilities with ex-partners, or work through loyalties and emotional dynamics that can come with combining different family histories. At the same time, blended families also bring opportunities for new connections. They can offer children and adults alike a chance to form meaningful bonds, build new support systems, and create a shared life together. Of course, success in these families doesn't come automatically. It often requires open communication, flexibility, patience, and a real commitment to making the new family dynamic work. We'll keep exploring how family life continues to evolve by looking at two increasingly common forms: one-parent families and cohabitation. These reflect not only personal choices, but also broader social, economic, and cultural changes that have reshaped what we think of as normal family life. Starting with one-parent families, this group represents a growing segment of Canadian households. While these families can offer love, support, and strong bonds, they often face significant challenges, particularly when it comes to finances. Raising children on a single income, or in some cases with very limited income, can place enormous strain on the parent and limit opportunities for the children. Everyday essentials like housing, childcare, and education become harder to manage, and the stress of doing it alone adds to the pressure. The impact on children in one-parent households is also something to consider. On average, these children are more likely to complete less schooling and to earn lower incomes later in life. This means the economic struggles of one generation can easily carry over into the next, making it harder to break the cycle of disadvantage. Still, many one-parent families find support through extended family networks. It's common, for example, for a single parent to live with their own parents, forming a multi-generational household. These arrangements can offer practical help with housing costs, childcare, and emotional support. Of course, they can also bring their own complexities as multiple generations navigate shared space, roles, and expectations. Now let's shift to cohabitation, which has grown significantly in recent decades. Simply put, cohabitation means an unmarried couple living together and sharing a household. It's become a popular alternative to marriage, especially among younger adults or couples who want to test the waters before committing legally. In Canada, common law relationships are now widespread, and not just for child-free couples. In fact, cohabiting couples are increasingly likely to include young children, making them a major part of the country's family landscape. People choose cohabitation for various reasons. Some want to avoid the legal or financial obligations that come with marriage. Others prefer the flexibility, and many simply see it as a legitimate and socially accepted way to build a life together. As values shift, so do the forms families take. Beyond cohabitation, we're also seeing new forms of family emerging in response to social change and even new technologies. Let's look at a few more of these evolving trends, starting with gay and lesbian couples. In recent decades, same-sex couples have gained significant legal recognition and public acceptance. In 2001, the Netherlands became the first country in the world to legalize same-sex marriage and adoption. In Canada, key legal victories followed. In 1999, the Supreme Court ruled that same-sex couples must be granted the same rights as heterosexual couples. And by 2005, Canada had fully legalized same-sex marriage nationwide. Parenting in same-sex families is also increasingly visible. Research shows that gay and lesbian parents experience the same joys and challenges of raising children as heterosexual couples do. Love, care, and commitment are what define a family, not the sexual orientation of the parents. Another major shift in family patterns is the rise of singlehood. More people today are choosing to remain single, either for a time or for life. For many, this is a temporary phase as they prioritize education, careers, or personal development before committing to a long-term relationship. For others, permanent singlehood is a deliberate choice. These individuals may find fulfillment in friendships, creative pursuits, or careers, and don't see marriage as a necessary life goal. This growing acceptance of diverse life paths is reshaping how we define success, identity, and connection. It challenges the traditional idea that marriage and children are universal milestones and opens up more space for people to define family on their own terms. Let's now talk about two more recent developments that are reshaping how we think about family life in Canada: extended family households and new reproductive technologies. Both reflect how families are adapting to changing social, economic, and technological realities. First, let's talk about the rise of extended family households, especially among young adults. A growing number of young people, even after completing college or university, are finding it difficult to establish financial independence right away. Faced with economic pressures like student debt, rising housing costs, and limited job opportunities, many choose or feel the need to move back in with their parents. These young adults are sometimes called boomerang kids because they leave home only to return soon after. These extended family households can offer important benefits: emotional support, reduced living expenses, and help during life transitions. At the same time, they reflect a blend of independence and dependence, where young adults may be working towards self-sufficiency while still relying on their family for stability. This trend also challenges the traditional timeline of leaving the nest and shows how flexible modern family arrangements have become. Next, let's look at how advances in reproductive technology have changed the way families are formed. One of the most well-known examples is in vitro fertilization, IVF, which allows for conception outside the body and offers new options to couples struggling with infertility. But it's not just for heterosexual couples. Technologies like IVF have also expanded possibilities for same-sex couples and single individuals who want to become parents. While these innovations have opened up new paths to parenthood, they've also sparked ongoing ethical debates. Questions arise around the limits of genetic selection, the role of technology in reproduction, and who has access to these often expensive procedures. There are also concerns about how these technologies might shape definitions of parenthood, family, and even the meaning of biological connection. Finally, we need to tackle a difficult but important topic that affects many families across Canada: family violence. This term covers a range of abusive behaviours, emotional, physical, and sexual abuse that occur within families. It's more common than many people think, and it can have devastating effects on individuals and entire households. Let's start with violence against women, which remains a significant concern despite growing public awareness and societal attention. Abuse can take many forms. In intimate relationships, this may include spouse battering, coercive control, and marital rape, forms of violence that often stem from deeper power imbalances within the relationship. These aren't just isolated incidents, they reflect systemic patterns of gender inequality and control. One major issue here is underreporting. Many survivors of intimate partner violence don't come forward due to fear, shame, or a lack of access to support systems. Some worry about being believed, others fear retaliation, and many simply don't have the resources, financial or social, to leave the situation. As with many violent crimes, the true scale of this issue is likely much larger than official statistics suggest. Children are also vulnerable to family violence, and the impacts can be particularly long-lasting. Abuse can take several forms: physical violence, neglect, emotional abuse, and sexual abuse. Beyond the immediate harm, these experiences can interfere with a child's emotional development, sense of safety, and ability to form healthy relationships later in life. As for who commits this kind of violence, it's important to avoid oversimplified stereotypes. While it's true that most child abusers are men, there is no single profile of an abuser. However, one notable pattern is that many abusers were themselves abused as children, suggesting a troubling cycle of violence that can carry across generations if left unaddressed. Family violence reminds us that not all families provide safety and support. For many, the family can also be a site of control, fear, and trauma. Recognizing this reality is essential, not only for understanding the full picture of family life, but also for supporting efforts to create safer, more equitable relationships within families and communities. So, what does the future hold for families in Canada and beyond? As we've seen, family life is constantly evolving in response to social, economic, and technological changes. While we can't predict everything, there are several key trends that seem likely to shape the future of families. First, divorce rates are expected to remain high. Although marriage is still valued by many, the pressures and expectations that come with it, combined with changing norms around personal fulfillment, mean that divorce will likely continue to be a common transition. And while research shows that divorce can have negative effects on children, especially when it's accompanied by conflict, it's also increasingly seen as a path toward healthier outcomes for individuals in unhappy relationships. Second, we can expect to see greater diversity in family structures. The traditional nuclear family is no longer the default. We'll continue to see growth in single-parent households, blended families, same-sex parent families, and chosen families, networks of care that aren't necessarily based on biology or legal ties. This reflects a broader shift toward valuing relationships based on connection, care, and shared life goals rather than fixed social models. A third trend is the ongoing gender imbalance in child rearing. Even though there's been progress toward more equal parenting roles, women still carry most of the burden when it comes to childcare and domestic work. Unless we see deeper shifts in cultural expectations and workplace policies, limited male involvement in daily child rearing is likely to persist for the foreseeable future. Fourth, economic pressures will continue to shape family life. Job insecurity, rising housing costs, and the high cost of living will influence decisions around marriage, parenting, and even where and how families live. These pressures may increase reliance on extended family, delay major life milestones, or push people to rethink what family support looks like in practical terms. Finally, reproductive technology will play an even larger role in how families are formed. As access to procedures like IVF, surrogacy, and fertility preservation improves, more people, regardless of gender, relationship status, or sexual orientation, will be able to pursue parenthood. But these developments will also raise new ethical and legal questions about access, rights, and the definition of parenthood itself. We may also see the line between family life and working life continue to blur, especially with trends like remote work and flexible schedules. This can offer new possibilities for work-life balance, but it can also bring challenges in separating professional demands from family time. In short, the future of families is diverse, dynamic, and complex. As social norms shift and technology advances, families will continue to adapt in creative and sometimes unexpected ways, reshaping what it means to build and sustain meaningful relationships in the modern world.